Chapter 2. Taffy and Trixie. I can hardly call Taffy a patient as he is so well and strong. Perhaps an attendant would be more suitable, as he is always in the hospital looking after the patients, and nothing goes on that he does not see. But Trixie is suffering from the asthma. Taffy is the largest tiger cat I have ever seen, and as he has the crook in his tail, he belongs to the tabby breed. Taffy is very large, usually weighing 14 pounds, but he has a very small head and very small, finely shaped paws. The underparts of him look like black velvet. In colour he is mostly jet black, and the other fur, very much like a raccoon's, light tan at the ends, shading into yellow, then into drab. As the sun strikes him, every hair seems full of light, and he is one mass of iridescent colours. His marking is most beautiful. The top of his head is black, branching out into 5 narrow black stripes down his neck. A black stripe 3 inches wide, without one light hair, going all the way down his back and going to the end of his tail and under. Of course, on the tail the stripe is much narrower. The narrow black stripes go down each side of his back and tail. His tail is not long, but very bushy, like a nice boa. I never saw more exquisite colouring and marking than Taffy has underneath, from his throat to his tail. His coat is beautifully soft and thick, and shines like satin, and his eyes are very green. He is particular about his toilet, but insists upon my helping him to keep it glossy. His own comb is kept on my dressing table, and he asks me to comb him twice a day, and sometimes oftener. I can tell you nothing of Taffy's antecedents, as I found him one morning in our backyard almost starved to death, and about as thick through the body as a shingle. At first I thought he had dropped from heaven, but I soon learned from his sayings and doings that he must have been quite intimate with the inmates of the lower region. I tempted him with chicken, but it was some little time before I could put my hand on him, and to tame any animal you must be able to touch it with your hand. After 2 or 3 pats, he seemed to realise that I was a good friend. Soon I had him in the house, and for 3 years we have been devoted to each other. I have had a great many cats, but never one who has had so much of the wild animal in him. All of my friends said I could never tame Taffy, and it was many weeks before I had much influence over him. And I never feel quite sure now whether I am to be loved or scratched, as he still has the temper and the actions of a tiger when anything goes the wrong way. He usually lies down like a tiger, with legs straight out in front, tail straight out behind, and when I speak to him he will always blink his eyes and speak to me. If you touch him in passing, he will grab at your feet and spit and growl. He never mews when he wants anything to eat, but will chase me or my maid and grab at our feet. If he does not like what is given to him to eat, he will walk all about his plate and scratch as if he were covering it up. I am the only one Taffy ever shows much affection for, but to me he is very loving. He will lie as long as I will let him with his paws about my neck and head on my shoulder. If he is sound asleep anywhere and I begin to read aloud, sing or whistle, he will get up directly, jump on my lap, put his paws about my neck, his face close to mine, and begin to purr. As he always looks very pleasant, I flatter myself he likes the tone of my voice. When I had my bird little Billy, it would make Taffy simply furious if I put him out of my room and closed the door. One morning he was so ugly, my maid did not dare open the door to come in. After that, when I wanted him to go downstairs, I had my maid come to the bottom of the stairs and call, "Taffy!" Then there was never any trouble. When he was in a tearing rage, I can always quiet him by taking tight hold of his paws and kissing his eyes. I have told all of these things about Taffy, so my readers will appreciate what I have been able to do with him. It is needless to say that when little Billy went away, Taffy was the happiest cat in town. His devotion increased daily to me, and he lived in my room, only going down to get something to eat. I think by this time you are very well acquainted with Mr. Taffy, and I will present Trixie to you. Of all the canary birds I have ever seen, Trixie is the prettiest, daintiest little bird you can possibly imagine. His colour is light yellow, with a much deeper shade between his wings, shading into an almost orange. His wings and tail are white, with just a line of yellow on some of the feathers. His eyes are unusually large and bright, and his little legs and claws are very pink, and so slender they do not look strong enough to support his finely shaped body. He is really a very superior bird, and sings like an angel. Trixie had never been out of his cage when he came to me, but before I had him a week, he came out, perched on my finger, took things from my finger or mouth, would kiss me, and go all about my room on my finger, and very soon went all about the house with me. He was very fond of sweet apple, but I never let him have it inside his cage, but made him come to me for it. I kept a piece in a little dish on my table, and he soon found out where it was, and would help himself on the sly. I also kept on my table, in a little china cup, some hemp seed, which I gave to Trixie as a great treat. Every time I would tap on the cup and make it ring, Trixie would come out of his cage, down from a picture frame, or wherever he was, for a seed. One day he had had his one hemp seed, and teased for more, but I said no, and he went flying about the room, having a fine time. Soon he flew back on the table, hopped over to the cup, gave it 2 or 3 taps to make it ring, then hopped onto the top, reached down, and helped himself to 2 seeds. Trixie is a very vain little bird, and likes nothing better than to go over on my dressing table, walk back and forth in front of the mirror, or sit on my pincushion and admire himself. Trixie came to me one afternoon, and Taffy knew nothing of his arrival until the next morning. When he came upstairs and saw a little yellow bird in a house of gold, he was like the little girl's bunny, who was not a bit afraid, but awfully much surprised, when she had firecrackers for the first time. His eyes were like balls of fire, while his mouth opened and shut, making a hissing sound, and his tail going at the rate of a mile a minute. He walked into my room like a wild tiger, with an air as much to say, "If this is little Billy come back dressed in yellow, he must die," and sprang at the cage. I took him firmly by the paws, looked straight into his big, angry eyes, and said in a soft, firm voice, "Taffy, this is Trixie, and he is not to be eaten or hurt any more than my little Billy who went away." I let go of his paws. He walked out of my room and downstairs without looking back. In about an hour I looked out into the hall, and there sat my dear old Taffy on the top step, looking very meek and wishful. I spoke kindly to him, and asked him to come in and see his new brother Trixie. After a few moments, he came in very slowly and went behind my bed. Soon he came from under the valance. The cage sat on a chair and I in front of it, never looked at the cage, jumped into my lap, put his paws about my neck, and began loving me. I took him to bed with me, and he never moved until Trixie began to sing in a most delightful way. Then he looked at him and listened very intently. I talked to him, and softened his feathers, and soon he snuggled down in my arm and went to sleep. When he got out of bed, he never glanced at the cage, but went directly downstairs, and I felt I had made a very good beginning. Everyone said I could never teach Taffy not to kill Trixie, and the reason his catship did not kill little Billy was because he was afraid of him and so carefully watched. I knew there was not a place in the house I could hang the cage where Taffy could not get at it if he made up his mind to do so. Of course, for days and weeks I felt anxious, and did not mean to leave them alone together. I never turned Taffy out of my room. If he went up to the cage and put up his paw, I would say, "Taffy, you must not put your paw on the cage," and, as he always minds, he would take it right down, sit by the cage, and I would talk to him kindly. Fortunately, Trixie was not at all afraid of Taffy. Taffy always wears a yellow satin collar with bells all around. Often I would hear him coming upstairs when I was lying down, and I would keep very quiet to see what he would do. Sometimes he would come over to the cage, look at Trixie pleasantly, then lie down by the fire and go to sleep. More often he would lie down without even looking at him, but the moment he heard me talking to Trixie, he would get up and come to me to be petted, and I always gave him a great deal. One day when Taffy was in another room, I let Trixie out and tried to be very quiet. I was sitting on the floor with Trixie hopping about me. Before I hardly knew it, Taffy was in my lap, and soon I had Trixie on my knee eating seeds. If I took the cage on my lap with Trixie inside, Taffy would immediately jump up and crowd in between the cage and me. Taffy was very much afraid the first time he saw Trixie take his bath, and ran under the bed and peeped out from under the valance. One morning the cage sat on the floor, and Trixie was ready for his bath when Taffy came in and sat close to the cage. Trixie took a big drop of water in his bill and threw it in Taffy's face. Taffy moved back a little and looked all about to see where it came from. While he was looking, Trixie went into his bath and splashed the water all over Taffy's face in a very roguish way. To say Taffy was surprised is speaking mildly. He turned to me with an angry cry and went out of the room. The next morning the same thing happened, but instead of going out of the room, he went on the other side, out of reach of the water, but where he could still see all that went on. After that, he became so interested he did not mind if the water was splashed all over his face, and would sit as close to the cage as he could get. While Trixie was eating his breakfast, he would lie down close to the cage and go to sleep. As I previously said, I never meant to leave Taffy in the room with Trixie, but he was often there hours before I knew it. When I found him, he was always asleep in front of the cage or by the fire. One morning after the bath, I put the cage up by the window. Taffy did not seem to like it at all. He looked at me most wishfully, and began talking cat language, and I knew he was saying, "Please put Trixie back on the floor." I did so. Taffy began to purr, lay down with his back close to the cage, stretched out, and went to sleep. He had been lying that way for an hour when some visitors came. It seemed too bad to disturb Taffy, so I left him and thought I would risk it. 2 hours passed before I went back, and you may imagine my delight when I found my 2 boys, so different in colour, size, and disposition, as happy as 2 kittens. Trixie was singing merrily. Taffy had wakened, changed his position, and looked as if he felt very proud, being left to take care of his small brother. His eyes were as soft as velvet, and he spoke to me in a soft, cooing tone. Since then I have never felt there was any danger in leaving them together. I regret to say Trixie has a strong will of his own, and almost as bad a temper as Taffy. At different times, I had 3 wee baby birds brought in to me, but they all died. Trixie was very jealous of them, and when he saw me feeding them he would become very angry, beat his wings against the cage and beg for me to let him out. One day I put one of the little strangers on the floor and let Trixie out. He flew at the waif, and tore feathers out of the top of his head. I took the poor little frightened thing in my hand. Trixie flew on my finger and pecked him. I put him in my other hand, and Trixie flew at him more angry than ever. Then I put him on the floor, and Trixie was so happy, he flew on my head, hopped about my shoulders, and kissed me in the mouth. In the middle of the performance, in walked dignified Mr. Teffy, with a look which plainly said, "What more are you going to bring into this room?" He sat by my side looking at the newcomer, and before I knew what he was going to do, reached out his paw and gave him a good slap, which sent him off my lap onto the floor. Early in the fall, before I had any fire in my room, I would bring Trixie down in the morning and keep him until evening, and for 2 weeks Taffy never went near my room during the day, but stayed down there with Trixie. The first day I had a fire in my room, I did not bring Trixie down as usual. After I gave Taffy his luncheon, I missed him, but did not go to my room until 5 o'clock, and there was faithful Taffy, sound asleep close to Trixie's cage, and now he stays in my room all day. He has plainly shown that, if Trixie stays there, he stays too. I find that animals want to be treated very much like children. The more intelligent they are, the easier it is to influence them, and the quicker they are to read you. First, give them a great deal of love and kindness. Always be firm, very patient, and above all, never deceive them in the most trivial thing.